He signed so fast he didn't even read it. That was the first thing I noticed. If you're ready to hear the whole story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let's get into it. Not the judge. Not the courtroom. Not even the way my hands shook. Just the sound of his pen scratching across the paper. Quick, careless, confident. Like this was already over. The courthouse sat in downtown St. Louis, all gray stone and cold air conditioning. It smelled faintly of old files and burnt coffee. People whispered in corners. Shoes squeaked on polished floors. This wasn't dramatic. It was worse. It was ordinary. Ethan sat across from me at the long wooden table, relaxed, one ankle resting on his knee. Navy suit, crisp tie, the same one he wore to my father's funeral 3 months earlier. He didn't look at me, not once. Our lawyer slid the divorce papers toward him. "Just sign here," she said. Ethan smirked. "Guess this is it, huh?" I kept my eyes on the table. I'd learned that if I looked at him too long, I'd forget why I left. He signed, then leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said softly, loud enough for me to hear, "at least one of us is finally getting something out of this." I swallowed, didn't respond. Silence had become my armor. The judge hadn't entered yet. We were still waiting, which was strange. Divorces like ours usually moved fast. No kids, no shared business, no real assets, at least that's what Ethan believed. That's what everyone believed. My phone buzzed in my purse. One message, from a number I didn't recognize. "I'm outside. Everything's ready." My heart skipped. I locked the screen without replying. Ethan glanced at me then. Finally. "You nervous?" he asked, amused. "Don't worry. I won't ask for alimony." He laughed at his own joke. I stared straight ahead. If I spoke, I might cry, and I wasn't going to give him that. 3 months earlier, I'd stood beside him in a black dress, holding his hand as my father was lowered into the ground. Ethan had whispered, "At least now we can move on." I didn't understand what he meant then. I did later. The bailiff called our case. We stood. The judge entered, an older woman with sharp eyes and a calm presence. She scanned the room, then the file in front of her. She paused, just for a second. "Before we proceed," she said, "there's an additional matter attached to this case." Ethan frowned slightly. I felt my pulse in my ears. She adjusted her glasses. "It concerns an estate," she continued. "Specifically, the will of Richard Hale. My father's name, out loud, in this room." Ethan turned toward me so fast his chair scraped the floor. "What?" he whispered. I didn't look at him. Couldn't. My chest felt too tight. The judge continued, calm and precise. "It appears Mr. Hale's will was filed late due to probate delays. However, it is legally binding and directly impacts the proceedings today." The room felt smaller, hotter. Ethan let out a short laugh. "Your Honor, with respect, that has nothing to do with our divorce." The judge met his eyes. "I'll be the one to decide that." She opened a thick folder. Paper rustled. The same sound as Ethan's pen earlier, but slower, heavier. My hands clenched in front of me. I thought of my father's voice, his quiet way of speaking, the way he always paused before saying something important. "People show you who they are when they think no one's watching," he used to say. I wondered what he'd seen. Ethan leaned closer to me, his voice low. "What is this?" I finally looked at him. For the first time that day. "You'll hear it like everyone else," I said. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. The judge cleared her throat. "We will now read the relevant portion of the will into the record." Ethan straightened, still smiling, but it was thinner now. Forced. The confidence he walked in with had cracked. Just slightly. The courtroom went silent. Every sound felt louder. Every breath counted. And as the judge began to read my father's words, I realized something I hadn't felt in months. Not fear. Not sadness. Control. Ethan thought the papers ended the story, but my father had written a final chapter, and it was about to change everything. The judge began reading. Her voice was calm, steady, practiced. The kind of voice that didn't rush and didn't soften the truth. This is the last will and testament of Richard Hale. I felt my throat tighten. I hadn't heard my father's name spoken that formally since the funeral. Ethan shifted beside me. At first, he still looked amused. Like this was a delay. A technical hiccup. Then the judge kept going. I leave my estate in trust to my daughter, Lydia Hale. Ethan's smile faded. Just a little. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. To be released in full upon the legal dissolution of her marriage to Ethan Brooks. The air changed. Not dramatically, but unmistakably. Ethan blinked. What? The judge didn't look up. She kept reading. The property, accounts, and holdings listed herein are not to be considered marital assets under any circumstance. I felt my heartbeat slow. For the first time that morning. Ethan laughed again, but this time it sounded wrong. Your Honor, that can't be right, he said. We were married when her father passed. The judge finally looked at him. That is correct, she said. Which is why the assets were placed in trust until today. Ethan turned to me, his voice sharp now. You knew about this? I shook my head. Not until after he died. That part was true. My father had been quiet about many things. The judge continued. The will also specifies that any attempt by a spouse to influence, access, or control these assets would result in forfeiture of associated benefits. Ethan's lawyer stiffened. Mine stayed still. I thought back to all the times Ethan told me my father was old-fashioned, too cautious, too suspicious. I wondered how long my dad had seen through him. Ethan leaned back, jaw tight. This is ridiculous, he muttered. She didn't earn that money. The judge's eyes sharpened. She earned the right to inherit it, she replied. Just like anyone else. The courtroom felt smaller now, heavier. People had stopped whispering. Even the bailiff stood straighter. The judge turned another page. There is one more clause relevant to these proceedings. Ethan's fingers curled into his palm. I stared at the bench, barely breathing. In the event of divorce proceedings initiated with malicious intent or public humiliation, the trustee is instructed to accelerate distribution. I heard Ethan inhale sharply. The judge looked at the file. Based on evidence submitted, that condition has been met. I didn't smile. I didn't react. I just sat there as something long buried finally surfaced. Protection. Ethan stood up. This is insane, he said. She left me with nothing. The judge remained unmoved. Mr. Brooks, she said. You left this marriage long before today. Silence followed. Thick, unavoidable. Ethan's lawyer whispered something to him. He didn't respond. He just stared at the papers he'd signed minutes earlier. The ones he hadn't read. The judge closed the folder. We'll recess briefly before finalizing the divorce, she said. Her gavel tapped once. Clean. Final. As people stood and filed out, Ethan turned to me. His voice dropped. You planned this. I met his eyes. No, I said simply. My father did. I walked out of the courtroom alone. My legs felt weak. My chest felt lighter. Outside, the hallway buzzed again. Phones ringing, footsteps echoing, life resuming. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. For the first time since the funeral, I felt him with me. Not gone, present. But as the relief settled, another feeling crept in. Unease. Because I knew Ethan well enough to understand one thing. Men like him don't accept loss quietly. The will had shifted the balance, but what Ethan would do next could turn justice into war. Ethan didn't follow me out right away. That alone told me something had changed. He liked control, liked the upper hand. Silence wasn't his style unless he was planning. I drove home through downtown streets, traffic thick and slow. The radio played softly, some afternoon talk show I didn't absorb. My hands stayed steady on the wheel. That surprised me. I thought I'd feel shaky. Instead, I felt alert. My apartment sat just outside the city. A modest place I'd moved into after leaving the house we once shared. Beige carpet, thin walls, a small balcony that overlooked a parking lot. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I dropped my keys into a bowl by the door and leaned back against it. The quiet pressed in. That's when the weight hit. Not the money. Not the will. The realization that my father had known my marriage would end this way, and had planned for it. My phone rang. Ethan. I didn't answer. It rang again. Then a text. We need to talk. I stared at the screen. I typed back one word. Later. I spent the afternoon sorting through old boxes I'd never unpacked. Things from my dad's house. His handwriting on envelopes. Receipts folded neatly. A watch he'd stopped wearing years ago. He had been careful. Always preparing. Even when I thought he was just being distant. By evening, my phone buzzed again. This time, a voicemail. Ethan's voice was different now. Not mocking. Controlled. Too controlled. Lydia, he said. We can work this out. Let's not make this ugly. I deleted it. The next day, his lawyer called mine. Requests. Questions. Delays. Suddenly, the divorce wasn't so simple. Ethan started showing up everywhere. At the coffee shop near my office. The gym I went to early mornings. Once, outside my building. Always polite. Always watching. You don't have to do this, he said one afternoon, leaning against his car as I walked past. I already am, I replied. He smiled thinly. You think your father saved you. He just gave me something to fight. That night I barely slept. Not from fear. From clarity. I saw the marriage clearly now. The small digs. The jokes at my expense. The way he treated my father like an inconvenience. I called it love. It wasn't. 2 days later, my lawyer called. There's something you should know, she said. Ethan is contesting the will. My stomach tightened. Can he? He can try, she replied. But it won't be clean. Nothing ever is when money meets pride. I sat at my kitchen table long after the call ended. The hum of the refrigerator filled the room. I thought about backing down. About offering a settlement. About choosing peace over conflict. Then I remembered Ethan's smile when he signed those papers. The way he'd laughed. No, this wasn't about punishment. It was about standing where my father had placed me. Firm. Protected. Seen. Ethan sent one last message that night. You wouldn't survive without me. You never did. I read it twice, then turned off my phone. Outside, rain started to fall. Light at first, then steady. I stood by the window and watched it streak down the glass. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready, because if Ethan wanted a fight, he was about to learn something he'd never understood during our marriage. I wasn't alone, and I wasn't weak. Ethan had chosen conflict, but the next move wouldn't be his, and the truth waiting in my father's past was about to surface. The call came from a number I recognized but hadn't seen in years. My father's attorney. I let it ring once before answering. Lydia, he said gently, I think it's time we talk. We met 2 days later in a small office near Forest Park. The building looked unchanged. Same brass door handles, same faint smell of paper and polish. I'd been here once before, right after the funeral. I remembered sitting in the same chair, numb, answering questions without really hearing them. This time was different. My father's attorney slid a folder across the desk. There are things your father didn't want released all at once, he said. He believed timing mattered. I opened the folder slowly. Inside were letters, not addressed to me, to Ethan, unsent. I looked up. Why would he write to Ethan? The attorney folded his hands. Because he saw what you couldn't, and because he wanted a record. The first letter was dated 2 years before my father died. It was calm, direct. It warned Ethan politely not to interfere with my finances, not to isolate me, not to treat marriage like ownership. No accusations, just boundaries. The second letter was shorter, sterner. It referenced bank transfers. Loans Ethan had taken out, temporarily. Money I didn't know had moved. My stomach tightened. Your father monitored everything, the attorney said, quietly. He never confronted you because he didn't want to shame you or fracture your marriage before you were ready. I swallowed hard. He had been protecting me without letting me know I needed protection. The final letter wasn't addressed to Ethan. It was for me. Lydia, if you're reading this, it means you've had to choose yourself. I'm sorry I couldn't make that easier, but I needed you to know nothing was accidental. You are not weak. You never were. My vision blurred. I pressed my lips together and kept reading. Love doesn't diminish you. It strengthens you. If someone asks you to be smaller to keep them comfortable, that isn't love. I closed the folder. My hands trembled. Ethan doesn't know about these letters, the attorney said. But if he continues to contest the will, they become evidence. I nodded slowly. That was the leverage. Not money. Truth. Outside, the city moved like nothing had changed. Cars passed. A jogger crossed the street. Someone laughed nearby. I stood on the sidewalk and breathed deeply. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. It was a reckoning. Ethan called that evening. I answered this time. You think you're winning, he said. But you're opening doors you won't like. I spoke calmly. You already opened them. Silence. Then, quieter. What do you know? Enough, I said. He hung up. No goodbye. That night I dreamed of my father. He didn't speak. He just stood there, steady as ever. I woke up feeling grounded. The next morning, my lawyer called. Ethan's team is pushing for an emergency hearing, she said. They want to discredit the trust. I looked out the window at the clear sky. Let them, I replied, because I finally understood something. My father hadn't just left me an inheritance. He'd left me the truth. And once truth enters a room, nothing stays hidden for long. The fight was moving into the open, and the secrets Ethan buried were about to surface where he couldn't control the story. The second hearing was set for a Friday morning. Same courthouse, different energy. This time, Ethan didn't smile. The courtroom in St. Louis felt colder than before. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was the way people avoided eye contact as we took our seats. Ethan sat stiffly beside his lawyer. His jaw stayed tight. His confidence looked rehearsed now, not natural. I sat quietly. I didn't need to perform. The judge entered and reviewed the case file again. This hearing concerns the challenge to the Hale Trust, she said. We'll proceed. Ethan's lawyer stood first. He spoke about technicalities, intent, interpretation, long sentences, careful words, the kind meant to confuse more than convince. Then it was my lawyer's turn. She didn't stand right away. She placed a folder on the table and waited. Your Honor, she said finally, we'd like to submit additional documentation into the record. The judge nodded. Proceed. My lawyer opened the folder. Letters. Printed. Dated. Clear. Ethan leaned forward. I watched his face as the first letter was handed to the judge. Confusion. Then recognition. Then something close to fear. The judge read silently. Her expression didn't change, but the room did. These letters, my lawyer said, were written by Richard Hale over a period of 2 years. They document concerns regarding financial manipulation and coercive behavior within the marriage. Ethan stood abruptly. This is outrageous, he said. Those were never sent. The judge looked up. That doesn't make them irrelevant. She continued reading, slowly, carefully, every word landing where it needed to. One line stopped her. She looked directly at Ethan. If you continue to access funds that do not belong to you, I will take steps to ensure my daughter is protected, whether she realizes she needs it or not. Silence. Heavy. Absolute. Ethan's lawyer whispered urgently to him. Ethan shook his head. Too late. The judge set the letters down. Mr. Brooks, she said, were you aware your father-in-law was tracking these transactions? Ethan swallowed. No. Were you aware your wife was not informed of them? He hesitated. That pause said everything. I'm going to be clear, the judge continued. This court does not look kindly on attempts to undermine protective trusts, especially when supported by documented intent. She closed the file. Firm. Final. I am dismissing the challenge, she said. In full. Ethan's shoulders dropped. Just slightly, but enough. As people stood to leave, he turned toward me. Not angry, not mocking, small. "You really didn't know, did you?" he asked. I met his eyes. "No," I said. But he did. Outside the courtroom, reporters lingered near the steps. Not many, but enough. I walked past them without stopping. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. That afternoon, I sat alone in my apartment. Sunlight stretched across the floor. I thought I'd feel victorious. Instead, I felt calm, like something that had been crooked was finally straight. My phone buzzed once. A text from Ethan. I never thought he'd go that far. I stared at it, then deleted it, because the truth was simple. My father didn't go far. He went where he had to. And now, with the legal fight over, something else loomed. Something harder. The part where money settles. And emotions don't. The court battle was finished. But the real cost of the marriage was about to surface, and it wouldn't be measured in dollars. After the ruling, everything slowed down. Not the paperwork. Not the logistics. The quiet. The trust was released in stages, just as my father had planned. Numbers moved. Accounts opened. Meetings scheduled. I signed where I needed to, but none of it felt real. Money doesn't make noise when it arrives. It just sits there, waiting for you to decide who you're going to be now. I took a few weeks off work. Not to travel. Not to celebrate. Just to breathe. Mornings became simple. Coffee by the window. Walks through the neighborhood. Trips to the grocery store where no one knew my name. Normal felt like healing. That's when the messages started coming in. Old friends. Distant relatives. People who hadn't checked on me during the divorce but suddenly remembered my number. Most were polite. Some weren't. "I'm so glad everything worked out for you. You must feel relieved now. Your dad really set you up." I didn't reply to most of them, because none of them asked how it felt to lose him. One afternoon, I drove out to my father's house. The one he'd lived in alone after my mom passed. It sat on a quiet street outside Springfield, the lawn still trimmed by a neighbor he'd paid in advance. I stood in the doorway longer than I meant to. The house smelled like dust and lemon cleaner. Like him. I walked through each room slowly. The kitchen table where he read the paper. The armchair by the window. The garage filled with labeled boxes. He'd prepared for everything. Except leaving. In his bedroom, I found a small notebook in the top drawer. Not legal. Not financial. Personal. Inside were short entries. Dates. Thoughts. Questions. One line stopped me cold. "I hope she learns she doesn't have to earn kindness." I sat on the bed and cried for the first time in weeks. Not loud. Just steady. That night, Ethan showed up at my apartment. No warning. No call. I didn't open the door right away. "I just want to talk," he said through the door. No lawyers. No games. I unlocked it and stepped back. He looked different. Less polished. More tired. "I lost everything," he said quietly. I crossed my arms. "You lost access." He nodded. "That too." He hesitated. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I studied him. The familiar urge to explain rose in my chest, then passed. "You didn't mean to stop either," I said. "That's the problem." He looked down. For a moment I thought he might apologize. Really apologize. Instead, he said, "If your father hadn't interfered." I opened the door wider. "We're done," I said calmly. He didn't argue. He just left. After that, the silence returned. But this time, it felt earned. I started therapy. Not because I was broken. Because I wanted to understand why I stayed so long. Why I ignored what I felt. Why love felt like effort instead of safety. Some answers hurt. Some freed me. All of them mattered. One evening, my lawyer called to say everything was finalized. No more hearings and no more filings. It was officially over. I hung up and stood by the window. The city lights blinked on one by one. I expected relief. Instead, I felt something deeper. Resolve. Because now came the part no one prepares you for. The part where you decide what to build after surviving something. And whether you'll let the past define the shape of your future. I thought of my father again. Of his quiet strength. Of the way he trusted me to grow into myself. I wasn't there yet. But I was closer. With the marriage behind her, a new question rose. What happens when freedom arrives, and you finally have to choose your own life? Freedom felt strange at first. Too quiet, too open. Like standing in a room with no furniture and realizing everything inside it was now up to you. I started small. I changed my routine. New walking route in the mornings. A different coffee shop. One with cracked tables and a barista who remembered names. No history there. That mattered. I went back to work part-time. Not because I needed the money. Because I wanted purpose that wasn't tied to survival. My boss didn't ask questions. Just said, "Good to have you back." And meant it. Therapy continued. Some sessions were quiet. Some left me exhausted. I talked about control, about silence, about how easy it is to mistake endurance for love. One afternoon, my therapist asked, "What do you want now?" The question sat heavy. I didn't rush to answer. "I want peace," I said finally. "But not the kind that comes from avoiding things." She nodded. "That's an honest answer." I donated most of my father's house contents. Not because they didn't matter, because they mattered too much to sit untouched. His books went to a local library in Springfield. His tools to a trade school. Keeping everything would have frozen him in time. Letting go felt like honoring him. One weekend, I drove to a small lake outside town. I sat on a bench and watched families pass by. Kids laughing. Couples arguing softly. Life moving forward without ceremony. I realized something then. I didn't feel behind anymore. Ethan tried once more. An email this time. Short. Careful. "I see things differently now. I hope someday you can forgive me." I read it once. Then archived it. Forgiveness didn't need an audience. Later that week, my lawyer sent a final note. Everything was complete. No loose ends. No obligations. I closed my laptop and exhaled. Long. Deep. That night, I pulled out my father's notebook again. I reread the lines I'd marked. Not looking for guidance this time. Just comfort. One entry stood out. "She'll find her footing when she stops waiting for permission." I smiled. He'd known. I began saying yes to things I'd once talked myself out of. A class. A weekend trip. Dinner with people who didn't know my past. Nothing dramatic. Just intentional. And slowly something shifted. I trusted myself. Not perfectly, but enough. Standing in my apartment one evening, surrounded by boxes I no longer needed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked different. Not stronger. Clearer. The life ahead of me wasn't loud or flashy, but it was honest. And it was mine. Still, one final thing remained. Not legal. Not financial. Emotional. The part where you stop defining yourself by what you survived, and start defining yourself by what you allow next. The past had loosened its grip, but the final chapter would reveal whether healing could turn into hope, and whether a new beginning was ready to take shape. Summer arrived without asking. Warm mornings, longer evenings, open windows. Life didn't wait for closure, it just kept moving. And for the first time in a long while, I moved with it. I sold my apartment and bought a smaller place just outside the city. A quiet street, trees that leaned over the sidewalk, neighbors who waved without needing explanations. The house wasn't impressive, but it felt right. On the first night there, I sat on the floor with a slice of pizza and no furniture. The room echoed when I laughed at myself. I hadn't laughed like that in years. I framed one photo of my father and placed it on a shelf in the living room. Not front and center, just present, like he always was. Work settled into a steady rhythm. I took on projects I actually cared about. Said no when something didn't feel right. No guilt. No over-explaining. That was new. One afternoon, while unpacking the last box, I found the divorce papers. Signed. Final. Done. I held them for a moment, then fed them into the shredder. The sound was sharp, then gone. I started volunteering on weekends, helping women navigate legal aid clinics. Sitting across from people who looked the way I once felt. Overwhelmed, unsure, quietly brave. I didn't give advice unless they asked. Mostly, I listened. One woman squeezed my hand after a session and said, I didn't know I was allowed to say no. I smiled gently. You are, I told her. I meant it for both of us. On the anniversary of my father's passing, I drove back to his house one last time. The new owners had planted flowers in the front yard. The place looked alive again. That felt right too. I stood on the sidewalk and whispered thank you. Not for the money, for the foresight, for believing in me before I did. That night, back home, I sat on the porch as the sky darkened. Fireflies blinked in the distance. Somewhere down the street, music played softly. Ordinary sounds. Beautiful ones. I thought about the courtroom, about Ethan's pen moving too fast, about how sure he'd been, and how wrong. The truth is, the will didn't save me. It reminded me I had always been capable of saving myself. I wasn't bitter anymore. I wasn't angry. I was finished carrying what wasn't mine. As the porch light flicked on, I felt something settle deep inside me. Not triumph. Peace. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind you build choice by choice. And as I closed the door behind me, I knew this wasn't an ending. It was something better. A beginning that didn't need permission. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.